The following podcast is a presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
Hello, welcome to Staring Into the Abyss. I'm your host, Richard Gerlach. With me, as always, is Matt Brandenburg.
Yes, finally, we did it, people.
And very special guest, Cynthia Pelayo.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes, this is exciting. I was super happy when Rich sent the message saying you were going to come on. I was like, yes.
Well, I'm dealing with the effects of the spring forward time, so hopefully I am entertaining in my sleepiness right now.
Seriously.
Yeah, I didn't get home till about 2:00 in the morning last night, so I know those feels. Technically 3, yeah. So we had a long Pathfinder session yesterday.
Very cool.
For today's episode, which sadly Michael can't join us with.
Yes, I finally did it. I finally broke him.
Matt's now the reigning champion. We'll be discussing, or I should say revisiting, the Joyce Carol Oates story, Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been? For long-time listeners, we covered this story in episode 2 or episode 3.
Yeah, I was trying to remember what number it was.
It's one of the first ones we put out.
Yeah, but this one will be much better.
Yes, this will be a fun revisit, and it'll be great to have another person's perspective on the story as well.
Yeah, it was funny. I literally just reread it right before this call, and we'll talk about it, but It's such a good story.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, same.
But before we do that, we'd like to give a few recommendations of media we consumed in the last week. So I'll go quickly first. Well, a few weeks ago, we had John Lees on.
Yes.
And he recommended the comic book Department of Truth.
Yes.
And holy shit, this comic. It is literally probably one of the best recent comics I've read.
It sounded amazing.
And it's by the same guy who wrote Something Is Killing the Children, which I also like a lot.
Yeah, that one's a good one, too.
It's kind of cool to see his themes pop over into Department of Truth. But all I'll say about it, because I don't really want to get into spoilers, is in the world of the comic, if enough people believe an event is true, reality shifts to make that event true.
Not just events, too, right?
It's anything, like conspiracies. Like if enough people believe, like lizard people, like if enough people believe, like Joe Biden is a lizard man in disguise, he'd turn into a lizard man in disguise. Like that's what would happen in the comic. And it's about a regular man named Cole who's kind of like looking into fringe conspiracies, and he comes across this whole like Department of Truth who end up recruiting him, and he has to work with them to prevent conspiracies in becoming reality. So they have to keep conspiracies.
Okay, I have a question, and I don't know if this is even covered or if this is a big reveal. I haven't read it. But you just said that this guy heard a conspiracy of the Department of Truth existing. So does that mean that they're not real?
No, they're real. So they're like super, super secret. But a slight spoiler, one of the arcs in the comic involves news reporters getting a bunch of like conspiracies about Barack Obama not being an American. It dives all back into that whole thing. And part of these conspiracies are being dumped on is about the Department of Truth. And these two journalists find out about the Department of Truth. And the leader of the department goes to Cole, and he goes, they're next door. They're coming in this room now. And then Cole's like, I don't want to kill them. And he hands him a gun. He goes, even if they don't mean us harm, if one of them knows about the department and they start talking about us while drunk, we're fucked. And then so like there were two reporters come in and they're talking to Cole and they say, listen, like we don't want to publish this stuff. We're not going to put it out there that this department's real. But my one question for you is, are you the good guys? And next panel is Cole pointing a gun at them, crying, saying, I think so.
Oh, man.
And the two reporters go, oh. And then you just see the next panel with bang, bang.
That sounds intense.
It's a really good comic. Like, I'm desperately awaiting volume 2.
Is it all conspiracies, or is it just anything like Santa Claus?
It's all conspiracies, but there's an overarching plot. So, like, the plot is pretty much Cole is a regular, like, dude who gets involved in the department. But when he was a child, he was involved where they used him in the Satanic Panic movement. And part of this was a man with a red star on his face eating children. And the man saying, like, he's not real. And everyone put it in his head that, like, this thing wasn't real and it was just part of the Satanic Panic. But as he's delving more into the conspiracies, he's finding this red star-faced man over and over again. And he's trying to, like, look into, like, maybe this was real. Like, maybe this wasn't what I thought it was. And it goes into, like, a lot of, like, super paranoid conspiracy stuff. I loved it.
It sounds amazing.
It's definitely one of the more cleverly written comics, and the art in the comic is just, like, fantastic. But I have a couple more, but I'll pass it over to you, Matt.
Yes. So my big one, which I think I might have mentioned last week, but I wasn't very far into it, was Todd Keisling's Life Transparent, which I believe was his first book and was just recently republished from Bloodshot Books. And it is really good. Basic story is when people who say are just kind of stuck in a rut, maybe they've worked in the same job for 10 plus years and their whole life is focused on that job. They kind of get pulled into this monochrome thing, which is the world. It's kind of the world beneath the world, and everything is just gray, just outlines of everything. All buildings are gray and everyone's just silhouettes and everything like that. And we follow this everyman guy who works as a telemarketer and hasn't done anything with his life. He is, of course, a writer and he wants to write the next big mystery, but he just can't get to it, and he starts fading. So going into this monochrome, and people start kind of not noticing him anymore. His wife doesn't see him, and he ends up having to work for the leader of this monochrome and has to hunt down somebody who escaped, and trouble ensues from there. It's so good. It's definitely his style. Having read Scanlines and Devil's Creek, he's definitely got like a view of the world, and it definitely shows here in his first novel. And so that's a lot of fun. It's got a little bit of the weirdness of a Thomas Ligotti kind of thing, where it's just bleak. We all live in this bleak world, and if you don't try to do something crazy, you're gonna get caught in this gray kind of thing. And so it's kind of like striking out, doing your thing, and doing something completely different than what everyone thinks you should. But it's great. It's part 1. I guess part 2 should be coming out soon, and then I think part 3 is the end of the year. But yeah, it's just kind of fun to see the beginnings of Todd Keisling, and he has a nice little afterword talking about what made him write this book, and then he even has an afterword to the new edition talking about how his afterword was maybe a little too starry-eyed, and now that he's lived a little bit longer, he knows a little bit more about the world. But definitely hunt down Life Transparent.
Awesome. I have that on my Kindle, so I got to get to that soon.
Yeah, it's really good. There's some really dark moments, and just there's like these creepy little like gnome goblin things that sits on everyone's shoulders. It's pretty messed up.
Interesting. Sina, what about you?
I am going to talk about 2 movies since we've covered comics and stories. So I recently watched Saint Maud and The Vigil, and they're both religiously themed horror films. And while I think a lot of people, I think the overall reception for Saint Maud has been pretty good, but I still find, I personally, and if I upset somebody, then sorry. But I found Saint Maud a little lukewarm because it's still a lot of it's about a recently converted nurse. She converts to Catholicism, and then she just becomes obsessed with saving the soul of one of her dying patients. And while that's a little different, we still see a lot of similar themes that we've seen with like Catholic horror films, like with the imagery and the saint and this whole idea of possession and the physical form being taken over. But it's the film does look beautiful. There are some really great images. So take a look at that. I personally found it kind of like meh, while people are just like singing its praises, and I'm like, I feel like I've seen it before. But the one that I loved was the Vigil, and I thought it was so original and so fresh. And it's a man is providing overnight watch to a dead member of an Orthodox Jewish community, and he finds himself like fighting against this like malevolent entity that's kind of taken over or the soul or the frame or the body of the person that he's watching over in this vigil. And it's just, I thought that was so fascinating because it spoke to these themes of like grief, and it's just things we haven't seen before in like religious horror film. And there was just some really great creepy moments in it, and and I like films that kind of end and you're just kind of like, well, what happened? Was there a resolution? I like things that aren't always like wrapped up, but I thought the Vigil was great, so that is probably so far one of my top this year. So
yeah, the Vigil's been on my list, especially as like a Jewish fan of horror. It's nice to see some more aspects of that coming out. Mm-hmm. But I was going to get to it this week, but I didn't get the chance to. I'll try to get to it next week, though.
Yeah,
what is it on?
I rented it on YouTube, but it's also available to rent on Prime. So it's like $3 or $4, I think, on YouTube. I rented it for, and then like $7 on Prime. But it was just so good. I need to watch it again because I usually there's a lot of people that they rewatch things all the time, like rewatch shows, rewatch films. I never do. Like if I watch something, I just kind of keep moving on to the next unless I'm going to discuss it. But I think I need to go back and rewatch Vigil just because it's just so different, like I said. And I watch a lot of horror films. I watch a lot of horror films. And so when I see something new and original, I get so excited.
Did you? I know I saw the Saint Maud as well. Did you see the credits for Saint Maud?
No, I didn't. What did it? Oh,
so remember the part when Maud sees like the cockroach for like a minute or so in the movie?
Yes.
They gave the cockroach a credit, and his name is Nancy.
Oh, that's nice.
That's sweet.
I died laughing when I saw that. The credits.
That's awesome. Okay.
Was that an A24?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that one was an A24. Yeah, I mean, I know people are like, it's so gorgeous, it's a masterpiece. And I'm like, yeah, okay.
I really liked it, but I wouldn't call it a masterpiece.
Yeah.
I am looking forward to the A24 movie, The Green Knight, coming out. But that's probably not going to be out till way later.
Yeah.
I have 2 more quick ones, since we also covered movies and comics. I started watching the Apple TV exclusive Servant, the M. Night Shyamalan show.
Oh, yeah.
And it's actually pretty good. I'm enjoying it a lot.
Nice.
It's about this wealthy family who they suffer their child, I think, dies of like I'm ruining this so badly. It's a movie couple who they just recently had a baby, and the baby passed away, and the wife is suffering from like severe just like depression and trauma from what happened. So their therapist suggested they get like a doll to just help her cope with everything. And the husband hires a nanny to help out with around the house to also make it seem like everything's normal to make it easier for the wife. And then the second day the nanny's at the house, the doll disappears and is replaced with a real baby.
What?
And it just kind of keeps on going like this, where like the wife and the nanny are just acting like everything's normal, because even through her trauma, she saw the doll as like her baby. And now it's a real baby for everybody. And the husband's trying to find out like what's going on, and this new nanny is like suspect as fuck. So he's trying to like dig into her backstory and figure out what's going on with her and everything. And there's some weird supernatural elements going on in the show, where like the husband keeps on randomly getting like hurt with different things inside this house, or like he'll sit down and he'll just have a huge ass splinter just like shoot inside him.
Jeez.
And like he's just being attacked by random places in this house, and he doesn't know what's going on. So there's some like weird type of stuff. I'd say it's kind of like a modern Gothic in like its representation, though.
Huh. I mean, the doll thing scares me a little, but it does sound interesting. Oh man, Apple TV, I feel like they've had a couple other good shows too in the past.
Yeah, I got 2 free months, so I figure why the hell not? I'll check this stuff out.
Did he write and direct this, or is he producing?
He's producing, and he is directing a handful of episodes.
Cool.
Someone else has written the show, so he did not do any of the writing. And his daughter actually directs a few of the episodes as well.
Oh, that's pretty sweet. Did you ever see? Oh, I'm gonna totally forget the name of it. It's the elevator one.
Devil?
Yes. Did you see that?
I actually never saw that.
It is really good. It's like this weird, almost like a single room kind of play where they're all trapped in an elevator and then they're trying to figure out what's going on, and there's clearly something evil in this place. It's very tight. I think it was less than 90 minutes, and I think he produced it and he might have wrote it, but he definitely didn't direct it. But I was really impressed, and like I liked some of his early stuff, and then probably like everyone else, they kind of were like fell off the wagon with him. But I think he's been doing some really neat stuff now. Maybe he needed that little break from the Starlight, and then he could kind of go back and do it, or Spotlight. I don't know. You know that word. And yeah, so that sounds really cool.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. And then real quick, I also decided to read and watch The Empty Man by Cullen Bunn.
Nice.
So the movie just came out a few weeks ago, and there's a lot going on behind the scenes with that movie that's kind of weird. And I feel bad it's gotten kind of a negative reception, because it's a really solid movie. And the comic was really fucking good too. Yeah, the movie has like a 49% average on review websites, which kind of bums me out because it's a really good movie. And the comic is also really, really great, but it's Cullen Bunn, so that's to be expected.
Is that a new one from him? No.
The first volume came out in 2014, and then he wrote 2 sequels in 2018. But the movie just takes the idea of the comic and makes it something different. So you can kind of look at the two separately, but they also kind of work together thematically. The movie's about these retired police detective who has lost his family, and he's now kind of working as like a private investigator. And one of his friends, her daughter goes missing. And the last time they heard of her daughter was her screaming in the classroom the day before, and then she vanished into thin air.
Jeez.
So he's trying to find this girl. And as he's looking for her, he finds a bunch of people who are believing in this entity they call the Empty Man. And around this ends up being people committing suicide with writing "The Empty Man made me do it" in blood.
Whoa.
And he's just trying to figure out like who the Empty Man is, what this has to do with his friend's family, what this has to do with him, and how it kind of all ties together, which leads him down this like rabbit hole where he discovers a whole cult, and it just gets fucking crazy. It mixes like a noir mystery with cosmic horror, folk horror, and like possession horror, kind of like mixed together.
Well, sounds awesome.
The movie's a bit long, and why I say it's kind of weird is so the movie was filmed in 2017, and it just came out. And I guess when Disney bought Fox, it put a bunch of weird, because they had the whole X-Men New Mutants thing, which got delayed 2 years when Disney bought Fox as well.
Yeah.
And even this one, because now if you watch the newer Fox releases, it says 20th Century Entertainment, but this one they still kept the 20th Century Fox logo in the beginning.
That's weird.
So it kind of felt like maybe they just didn't have faith in this movie and they just dumped it. But it's really good. I can't recommend it enough. If you're interested in seeing kind of a slow burn, intricate horror mishmash genre movie, I definitely recommend it.
What is it on?
I actually bought it, but you can rent it on Amazon or YouTube. You can buy it on Amazon or YouTube. It's on all the VOD sites. It's $5 to rent and $10 to buy.
Oh, well, that's not bad.
So it's not too bad at all. I figure just pay the 10 because especially after finishing it, I want to see it again and rewatch it and kind of piece things together a bit more.
Very nice.
So, anything else from you, Matt?
Oh man, no. A lot of Mario Kart this week.
Yes. Anything else from you, Sina?
No, nothing else. I just check out those 2 films and let me know what you think.
Excellent.
Will do.
Yeah.
I might watch the Vigil tonight. I'll see how things go. This is the quickest we've ever made it into the story discussion.
No, we're jumping right in, It was all Mike's fault.
It might be all Mike's. Sometimes it's my fault. I do consume a lot of media in a week sometimes. All right. So, as I said before, we're going to be revisiting Where You Going, Where Have You Been by Joyce Carol Oates. And this was chosen by Sina. So I want to ask, before we even begin, why this story?
I think this is one of the most perfect short stories. Personally, I am just fascinated and obsessed with true crime, and I consume, in addition to horror, I consume a lot of true crime. And then my poetry collection, Into the Forest and All the Way Through, that was nominated for Stoker this year. It deals with, I wrote one poem for each individual poem is dedicated to a woman that was either murdered or has gone missing. And so there's a lot of true crime elements to this particular story where Joyce Carol Oates was inspired by serial killer Charles Schmidt. She read a piece, I believe, in Life magazine, about, I believe he was called the Pied Piper of Tucson, when he was stalking young women. And so there's a lot of hints throughout the story that she's writing about Charles Schmidt, and he died quite some time ago. But I think this one is just it's a terrifying short story. I personally, I write a lot of different types of horror. I write poetry, but the horror that terrifies me the most is anything that's based on a true event or just people, like serial killers. So, and I think that she just built up the tension and the anguish in this so perfectly. I wish I could write something like this. So this is why, and I came and I had revisited it while I was actually right before I started really digging into my true crime poetry. I went back to this story just because I wanted to see what kind of emotions she was able to stir in me, and that was an inspiration for when I was writing my poetry. This is what I'm aiming to do with the poems that I'm writing. So this is it's a hard story to read.
Yeah.
But I think it's just the way she crafted it is just perfection.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I will say, Joyce Carol Oates is probably my second favorite writer of all time. So I think this is one of her best stories, but I feel like when it comes to short fiction, she's kind of perfected the art of writing short fiction. And this story highlights a lot of her talents, but it's also it's a tough read. And
I don't think and it's also not a story that, you can whip through it and read it quickly, but if you kind of, especially if you read it knowing some of the background information. I think some of these lines, like I just have all types of lines highlighted in this as I went through reading it, and it just kind of hit me even harder. But if you're coming to it like as a surface reader, yes, it's fantastic. But if you're coming to it as a reader with some of the background knowledge, I think it's just it's more gut wrenching. So
yeah. Like the first time that we kind of covered this, we were talking a little bit, trying to figure out different aspects of it. But she does this really cool thing with, and we're getting into it for everybody listening, this really cool thing with Arnold Friend, in which he doesn't seem human. Mm-hmm. Like with his shoes and the way he can't stand. And then there's even talks about his face. And so and what he knows.
And how he talks.
Yes. And so like you kind of, when we were talking about it before and even going through it again today, where I'm like, what is he? But that totally, like, because he almost is like the embodiment of all serial killers and all kind of these, like, oh my goodness, I'm going to totally blank on this word. It'll come to me, but he's an embodiment of something. It's just so interesting the way she can kind of like play with that and kind of play with a little bit of, maybe not supernatural is the right word, but play with it, something being off with this person.
And I would agree with you though, that there are like hints to, she does make him somewhat supernatural in this too. And the story's been called, it's been called a lot of things. And one of them has been like, it's been called an allegory that, there's a lot of hidden meaning throughout the story. And I think one of the best examples where he comes off as a supernatural type figure, and he isn't but I think she tries to play with a lot of things here. But one of the striking bits is when he starts telling her, towards the end of the story, about her parents and her sister at the barbecue, and he's kind of relaying to her what they're doing in that moment. And so that's just a strange bit right there. And then she kind of agrees. He refers to one woman at the barbecue, and then she says, "Oh, that's so and so," and it's just the strange moment that he does feel supernatural in a way. And some people have referred to him as he's the devil. She's writing about the devil, and I'm like, she's writing about a serial killer, an actual.
Yeah.
And I think if you just kind of like wipe it away and say it's the devil, it's not so scary. I think more terrifying is that she's writing about something that happens probably every day. Young man is whisked away by a man that's trying to charm her, and I think that's what makes this story even more terrifying. Like, you see where he's off, like you see the different angles of what he is and how he could be charming, but then you kind of turn the angle a little bit and you see he's this grotesque thing. And my mind just went blank. I forgot what.
But I think that makes sense because it like you said, like the turn of it, if you look at him from a different angle, and I keep going back to the Pied Piper thing, because that's the big thing. Like, I kept getting at where he's hanging out outside her house, and he's like keeps like calling her and like saying all these phrases and talking about the music and everything and calling her beautiful, all these Pied Piper techniques of like trying to get her out of the house. And that like definitely comes across, and that kind of that concept of the different angle thing. Again, kind of, I like that because that's the big thing you hear a lot. I mean, we hear that a ton about, what was it, Ted Bundy or what's his name, that is, everyone's like, he's so charming. And then you're like, oh yeah, but he, killed all these women. And that's kind of what this is. It's this very charming kind of greaser punk guy that's a little dangerous looking. But at the same time, it's like, no, clearly this dude is bad news. And so I like that she kind of like captures all of that and puts that in here. And
that's what I was gonna mention before I needed more coffee. But I think that's what this story speaks to a lot. Like you had said, Ted Bundy, and women said he was handsome, women said he was charming, and so I think we think that these men that lure and kill women are like these snarling, beasts, and a lot of the times they're not. Granted, there are some that do jump out at people from darkened alleys, but a lot of these types of crimes, they take place in the daylight, in the sunlight, and that's what happened here. It's a bright, beautiful sunny day, and in moments everything just shifted, and you can even see like points throughout the story where it started to feel like there was this transition period, when she was saying things felt off, when she woke up, sunbathing out in the yard. And the bulk of the story, there's this, and maybe to step back a little bit, but did you want me to give like a super 1 second or a few second overview?
I guess we should skip that part.
We did.
So super quick overview. The story is about Connie. She's a really pretty. Actually, stepping back even further, the story was first published in 1966. So this is written quite a long time ago for some people. But it's such a fantastic story, and I think I would highly recommend people go and read it just to see. And you can find it for free online. But it's been included in a lot of anthologies, and I believe Best American short stories as well. So it first appeared in 1966. The title is Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? By Joyce Carol Oates. And the story follows a 15-year-old girl named Connie. And, Connie's a regular, beautiful 15-year-old, and she's young, and she knows she's pretty, and she knows she's young, and she's happy, and she has a mother and a father and a sister. And the beginning of the story is just very much about her being young, going out to the mall with her friends, going, seeing boys and what that means to, we were all 15 and we liked, and just like this cute little period where she sees other boys that are of interest to her, just like that hint of excitement when you see someone that you like. And in one of these moments where she's out with her friends at the mall, she sees this strange boy standing out by his car, and he grins at her. And I thought that was very interesting that Joyce Carol Oates used grin, and I thought of like the big bad wolf. And he grins at her, he's leaning against his car, and he says, "Gonna get you, baby." And I was just like, terrifying. And so that's about the beginning of the story, and much of the story then takes place with him showing up at her house outside in his car with another male in his car, a friend. And it's the bulk of the story is him trying to coax her out of her house, and the slow buildup of terror and dread of what it means, of what's going to happen. And so she never really explicitly says what the intention is of Arnold Friend, but it is hinted pretty strongly throughout in the story. There's like parts throughout, like, he kind of essentially tells her what he's going to do with her. So that's a quick one.
The one thing that stuck with me both times is the concept of music. So that's very, and she even dedicates this to Bob Dylan. And I think if I remember correctly, he has a song with this title. Or there's something, I can't remember. I feel like we've talked about that, where there's some reason why she did that. But Connie really loves music, which again, 15, we all did. And that it plays a lot of what she listens to. And when they go to they go to like a drive-in, and she says like the music is just this background. That's just the noise. The sound of the drive-in is this music. And then she's hanging out that day. It's a Sunday, and she's out and she's listening to the radio, because this is what you do. And the radio announcer, it kind of like every once in a while pops in, but mostly just that. And then when Arnold shows up, he's listening to the same station, and his buddy in the car, Ellie or Eli, he's got a radio that never leaves his face. So I thought that was an interesting tie or thing that she put in here, just how much that's important to Connie, and almost again the big bad wolf luring her out, which is, I'm listening to the same stuff you are. I'm just as cool as you are. You should come and hang out with me. So I thought that was, I like that she put that in there, and just kind of captured that time of, I'm guessing this is the 60s since it's written in 66.
And there's so many references to music, and so she so the beginning of the story does give a dedication to Bob Dylan, and the song is, I had written it down.
It's All Over Now, Baby Blue.
Yes. And so it's a very sad sounding song, and so I'm assuming between reading the article about the serial killer and just listening to the song, that like Charles Schmidt, that just kind of pulled it all together. And then she talks about, there's even just a point in the story where she says, the music melds together, and I thought that was sad. And again, it talks about that whole idea of transition, that music felt like it was this light and airy and beautiful thing, and then she was even able to create this sense of dread.
Yeah.
Further along we went, just talking about the music. So
and even the fact that there's a couple parts when Arnold is talking that Connie hears it in like a rhythmic beat, or hears it as like this kind of rhyme. And at one point, even Arnold, he says, there's a line or something that he says, and she's like, oh, it sounds exactly like the announcer. This is the announcer's voice. I keep wondering on that, and I think I had brought it up before, where it's kind of like, is this also commentary on music? Because it just feels, especially with that part of having Arnold's voice be the sound of the announcer on the radio, and good or bad that this is a commentary on the music. It could be either, whatever. I was like, it's got to be something. She's got to be saying something about that music because of what she's doing here.
The way I interpreted it was that she's inside the house and she feels safe inside the house. And then the way I had felt it is when she said, he sounds like the music. And I felt like that created this idea where there was no barrier. Like she was no longer safe in her house. That's kind of how I was like, oh, that kind of like really struck me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would also say, I mean, music for Connie, because Connie is kind of presented as like this teenage girl. She knows that she's beautiful, and she's just trying to experience life. And I think one thing teenagers all do is we kind of lose ourselves in music, the music that we like. So I kind of see it as like a way for Arnold to try to kind of coax her or lure her in the sense of safety. Like, kind of, we like the same music, so therefore I'm not a threat.
Yeah.
Type of thing, because it's always seen as like the safety thing. Well, if he likes the same music I like, he can't be that bad of a person.
Yes.
Right. This whole building trust. And I think that's part of the killer that Joyce Carol Oates had written about, was that he was known to hang out with teenagers. He was older, and he was known to hang out with them and build trust with them, so much so to the point that some of these teens that he hung out with knew about his murders. And for some reason, they didn't talk about them. They didn't tell anyone that he was killing young women. So I don't know if that also plays into that idea of trust. Like, I don't know. So I guess I don't understand why why people don't ask for or call for help when they see someone doing anything bad. And the thing with the shoes, I thought that was interesting because the killer, Charles Schmidt, would also stuff his shoes, his boots, with like paper and objects to make him prop himself up like he's taller. And she did that, like she showed that throughout the story, like he was like unsteady on his feet. But then it almost, she kind of made him even like stranger, the way he would walk and lumbering and creeping. I don't know. She almost made him seem like you said, like a supernatural kind of creeping figure as well. Yeah. With the shoes device, by taking something that someone really did and just making it seem so off, so bizarre and terrifying.
Yeah. Thinking about that too, it goes very close to what you were talking about with this big bad wolf, because you think about that story about replacing the grandmother and that just now kind of clicked in my head is so much what feels like she's doing with this, is because they talk about the boots and they're like these, the greasy kind of black boots that you see that like the greasers kind of wore, and these tight jeans and this white shirt, like, and the fact that looks like he's wearing a mask and he's wearing a wig. So like she's commenting on the fact that this person is so trying to fit into what we assume Connie imagines as this great man, because she never really, like, what we kind of see at the beginning with Connie and hanging out with boys, we don't get a deep description on like what exactly, maybe is her style. She likes certain boys and other boys are boring and she doesn't like them. But you see this guy who looks like he's trying so hard to fit a style because of maybe what kind of music Connie listens to and maybe where she hangs out. And so he's like, oh, I'm going to dress up like these kind of greaser guys. But it's so like clearly it's not working. It's seeing the wolf's mouth under, clearly if the wolf in this like old grandmother's cloak kind of thing, it's like, clearly it's not that, but he's trying so hard to mask himself. I think it's interesting at kind of near the end, the fact that she's like, you're a lot older than I think you are.
Creepy.
Yeah. Just like it again, like it's just so like crazy, this like the way this kind of works. And then the whole Eli thing, I think, is such a unique kind of concept, because like you don't know what his deal is. He's just this, like, she calls him a man baby. And he's obsessed with the music, and he is like at one point talks about cutting the phone line, and at one point he's doing something else. So like he's this whole other like mysterious figure kind of playing in the background that I really liked, because again, it's like you brought up with the Vigil, where it's like it doesn't give you everything. It just shows you enough to be like something not right happening here.
We had talked about the big bad wolf, and I also I feel like she kind of played off of the idea of two wolves. I thought about like the three little pigs.
Yes.
Like, I'm going to blow your house in, because he kept saying, I'm not going to go in there. You're going to come out. And so, and then there's the idea of the mention of, do you want me to pull the phone wires out? Like, that's what's terrifying. And so there was this idea that the inside of her house, like her house was safe. But the moment she knew she would step out of it, it's like we knew that was it. It was over. And even towards the end, she asked him, and I'll read this little bit. She asked him, what are you going to do? And he says, just two things, or maybe three, Arnold Friend says, but I promise it won't last long. And you'll like me the way you get to like people you're close to. I'm like, oh, God, that's so hot. Maybe two or three things. And like, at the very end, he says, we'll go out to a nice field out in the country here where it smells so nice and it's sunny. And it's like she's telling you exactly what's going to happen without being graphic. And it's almost even more, it just totally weighs on you.
It's interesting too. This whole thing feels a lot like kind of the death of innocence, because it's just described as this beautiful Sunday, and exactly what you said, describing this beautiful field, and he's just kind of like he's going to be this nasty piece of this beautiful field that she lives out kind of in the country, and it's this probably beautiful part of the area, and she's seen it every day, and now he's going to come in and just take it away and make it this horrible place. And even the house, just the whole thing, because like we kind of get that at the beginning too, where her mom, she kind of has a lot of commentary about her mom, how she used to be beautiful and now she's not, and she's jealous of me because I'm beautiful, and we don't get along because I'm not as plain as my older sister. And so you're kind of seeing these things of that rebellious teenage years of just, even like when they do get a chance to sit together and maybe they get along, there's always something that turns that. And so you kind of have all of that leading up to now she's like, especially at the end when she realizes she's never going to see her mom again. And it's just this kind of like completely life is going to be a lot different. I mean, probably going to be killed. But yeah,
thought about, like, reading this, I thought about like The Last House on the Left, and even that was like a loose. Craven had said he was that's a loose adaptation of like The Virgin Spring, but there is no revenge aspect here. It's it kind of gave me like that very Last House on the Left feel, where you have these young women out. And they're just out and living life and happy. And then like within seconds, like everything just kind of shifts and changes and it's awful. And like you said, there's that moment where she knows she's not going to see her mom. She's not going to see her family again. Where was it? Yeah, she thought, I'm not going to see my mother again. She thought, I'm not going to sleep in my bed again. Her bright green blouse was all wet. So I just thought that was just so sad. What did you think? Wanted to ask you, what did you think about the symbolism of the numbers written on the car? Since that,
I was
the 33, 19, 17, right?
Yeah.
Yes. I was trying to figure that out.
I've seen a few different things. Like I've seen people be like, well, those refer to like biblical passages, or some people, what did he say? He says, now these numbers are a secret code, honey. And he read off the numbers 33, 19, 17 and raised his eyebrows at her to see what she thought of that. But she didn't think much of it. Like the first time I read it, like I didn't think it had anything to do with like biblical passages at all. I thought those were like the ages of his previous victims. So it's like, and that's why he kind of looked at her to see what she thought. Like you're 15, so I'm gonna mark of 15, almost like the old fashioned. I'm gonna nick a mark on my bedpost, and so I thought that was him nicking a mark on his car, because that's where he would take his victims to. So that's the way I interpret it. Maybe
I could agree with that interpretation. I'm gonna be honest with you, all the times I've read this story, I could never nail an interpretation down for myself for the numbers. I just thought it was always an interesting detail, but I could never figure out what I thought she was trying to get at. But I did read about like the people saying their Bible passages. I read one that was saying like they doing some math that adds up to 666, and I'm like, that's kind of a stretch, but okay.
I wonder too, with this, especially with the stuff, because the car, it's such an interesting thing with this car, because it's a gold convertible jalopy, kind of just beat up car, and he's spray painted all over it. So like he's drawing attention to himself. And they make a comment about the flying saucer. There's something that was a popular line from the year before. I guess a lot of the kids were saying it, according to Connie. I was wondering, and this is if that like had some meaning back in the 60s that, and maybe not, but like just it's interesting all this, because he even has like a mark where there's like a dent in his car, and he's like a crazy woman driver did this or something like that, and it's so like this is crazy, and he's got his name on it with a face.
Yeah, he's got his name on the car, right?
It's like what is happening?
All the attention to himself, but I feel like that's also part of the whole serial killer thing is. He's doing it in broad daylight, even bringing attention to himself, and no one sees it.
Yeah.
Like it's like, and kind of like with other, especially in the 60s, when other of these killings were happening, it was like they were happening in a community and nobody could see it happening. It was just like they're turning a blind eye to it, or they're trying to ignore it, or they just aren't paying attention to these horrible things happening in everyday life.
I think there was a shift in society where people, I know at least growing up, where I live in Chicago, and so I remember we would play outside in front, but there was always supervision, but and I just hear other people talk about when they were growing up and they were outside, but then things started shifting as these people started awful things just started happening to people. And maybe there's this idea of, previously, like in the 50s or 60s, people always assume, well, these bad things don't happen here, or these bad things happen to people who go out and look for bad things to happen to them. And so there was always that perception, or that there has been that perception or idea at one point in society, until we started realizing, no, there's just bad people. And nobody's it doesn't matter. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what anybody's doing. They can be laying out naked in front of their front lawn. Like, nobody has any right to like pick them up off the street and take them away into the woods and kill them. And so I think that slowly has finally like seeped into our society, that there's just awful people out there, and we need to protect ourselves. And maybe that's why Joyce Carol Oates like really wanted to like highlight the car. Like, here's this killer. He is right there for all of us to see, but nobody's really seeing it. Like, he's out in public and he's hanging out with the kids, and so, but nobody is saying this is a bad man.
Yes, that totally makes sense, especially because it's just like this clearly gold car, like this. She is definitely saying like you would have noticed this guy if he showed up, or you should have noticed.
You should have noticed him.
Yeah, and that's I was thinking about that for this one, and you definitely you hit that point, because we, especially now, or you hear that a lot. I mean, we always have, especially now, this generational talk about different generations and how the previous generation, the greatest generation, and all that stuff. And this one and the Joe Lansdale Night They Missed a Horror Show. And there's other ones too, but those are two that first come to mind, where these both really call out like, no, that time was not as magical as we think it was. The Lansdale one he wrote later, but Joyce Carol Oates, she was in the middle of it. And I think, especially with what you brought up, this is definitely her saying like, people need to look around.
Yeah, there's always this, I don't know, maybe it's just we want to look back fondly at the past, and there's this like, things were great back then. No, they weren't. They really weren't, because there were still people being killed. There's like tons of missing persons cases cold cases that at this point are likely not going to be solved, unfortunately, or maybe with DNA, I would hope a lot of these cases will be solved, but there's just a lot of awful things that happen at this time. Even through the 70s, there's just like this awful series of serial killers, across the West, young women going missing. We still don't know how many women, for example, Ted Bundy killed. So, just researching, most of the cases that I wrote for Into the Forest and all the way through, I kept them pretty, like, within the last 30, 40 years. I tried to keep them just more recent, because I wanted to highlight that this stuff still happens, and it's just awful. And for her to write about it at the time that she did, I thought she was brave, and she was just like, no, this is not a great time. There's this guy that he killed young women, and there were people that knew about it. And maybe that's why she highlighted the car, because it was based off of someone that was killing young women, and everybody, or not everybody, but a group of young people knew he was doing so.
Yeah, it's
100%.
Yeah, definitely. And it's I think it's awesome that she kind of did this, because it's like now we can kind of all see that in just all the terrible stuff. I was just literally thinking, and this is totally off the wall, but like even something like Back to the Future, which was made in the 80s, and it was that peak at the 50s. And like, sure, like on the outset, I don't know if you've watched it recently. It was great when you're a kid. You're like, oh, this is really fun. They're going back in 1955 and all this stuff. But like watching it now, first of all, Biff is a complete rapist. There's some like really horrible scenes when you watch it. It's really cringy. You're like, oh my God, this is happening. And then there's a lot of racist tones in that. And I don't know if Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis, they had to have been like, hey, we're going to make some commentary on the fact that people weren't all magical back then. But to think of it as almost like a kid's movie, and then to see it now, I know I saw it when I was at the age of my children, but I'm like, there's no way I'm going to show them that right now, because there's some pretty gnarly stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot Yeah, there's a lot. It's funny because my husband and I were having that conversation about like a lot of things that we saw in the 80s or like late 70s films, and we're like, I would never show that to my kid. Like a lot of like the language used, and I mean, yeah, it's a lot of things that were done back then would just not work today. So and a lot of us still look back fondly on some of those films. Like we'll talk about, was it that we were talking about Weird Science? Do you remember that one?
Yes.
Yes.
Would never work. Or even Revenge of the Nerds, right? I know I think they're remaking Revenge of the Nerds, but like something like Revenge of the Nerds, you probably look back at it fondly, and then you're just like, holy crap! There was like all this crazy like, misogyny and just like women being, exploited, and so.
Yeah.
And so it's this idea of if you look back on previous things, maybe it wasn't as great as we thought it was, and that's a whole discussion.
I think we tend to look back in the past with like rose-colored glasses, where it's like, oh, I like this movie a lot when I was a kid. Let me go see how it holds up now. We watch it when we understand context more, and it's just like, how did I watch this when I was a kid? Like, why did I find this funny when I was a kid?
Yeah, we especially it's been a year for quarantine, and I know we should be talking about Joyce Carol Oates, but this is, I think, works for this topic. For every week we've been watching kids movie, or like a movie to show the children, and we were going through a list of all these like older movies, and then we started kind of. Some of them, exactly what you said, like, remember, oh, this is great. Monster Squad. It's great. We should totally let the kids watch it. And then we kind of start looking it up, and there's some of the language in there. We're like, oh, maybe we should wait a little bit. It's just like, they don't need to hear that or know what that's there or why people back then would say those things and they think it would be funny. But anyway, to get back to this, the one thing, too, that I was thinking of that's interesting is, so Arnold is like, I'm not coming in the house unless you call the cops. Then if you touch that phone, I'm coming in. But then she's like, well, then I'm just going to wait. My dad's coming and he'll take care of it. And then this is the part that talking about the way people can get things to happen. He's like, okay, I'll wait for your parents and then I'll take care of all of them unless you come out here and meet me. And that's just such that like that secret thing, like when the creepy guy comes down and he's like, if you tell your mom what happened, I'm going to kill you or I'm going to kill your mom. So you're like so forced into this like situation. And it's just so like, it's really unsettling because you kind of you're like up until that point. You're like, oh, well, he said he's not coming in the house. It's fine. Then just wait till your parents come. But no, because you don't know what he's capable of and he is probably going to hurt them.
Yeah, that threat. And so there's this sacrificial, aspect to it that she feels like she has no choice at that point to save her family. Like she doesn't want her family killed. And so she knows that the decision has been made for, and I just hate saying that because you want to be like, grab a knife, close the door, hell with him, call the police. But, if you think about it, what if this is a house that's in a little rural nook of a community? And it's like, and what was it? There was like reference to like fire, like.
Yes.
He threatened to like, he didn't say if you don't come out. He's like, if the place got lit up with a fire, honey, you'd come running out into my arms. So there's like this insinuation like, all right, if you don't come out, I'm just going to burn the house down. Like that's why I mentioned the Three Little Pigs, right? Isn't out blow your house down, but
burn your house down instead.
Yeah, well, it's this really sad situation where it's like, if you don't come out, I'm gonna burn the house down. If you just stay in there and wait for your parents, I'm gonna take care of all of you. And so she just kind of goes out. Oh, I hate that. I just hate that.
Yeah.
Hate that.
And then you got his friend saying, "Oh, we'll cut the phone lines and everything." So they just like put him in. And then the neighbor. So like two things that I kind of were wondering about. And one is the phone call, because she does pick up the phone, but something really it goes really crazy. She can't she feels weird. She can't get her thoughts straight, and then she drops the phone. So I don't know what was happening there. And then the neighbor thing, but maybe we can talk about the phone first.
Yeah, the phone thing was really, really weird. And so she took the phone. It said that she did, like, she took the phone and then something roared in her ear, and that the phone was clammy. And that, so I guess, you know, when you, for people who remember phones in the house, and so just the sound of the phone, and then she's crying out for her mother. And it says she felt her breath start jerking back and forth in her lungs as if it were something Arnold Friend was stabbing her with again and again with no tenderness. And then a noisy, sorrowful wailing rose all about her, and she was locked inside it the way she was locked inside the house. So that was a really hard part for me. So she takes the phone. The story says that she takes the phone, she hears the noise, and that she kind of, there's this weird, I don't know, the way I would interpret it, this weird physical flash forward to her being killed with that mention, stabbing her again and again with no tenderness. So I don't know. I don't know. It could be that she's already reached a point of no return. She was maybe, I don't know. What do you think? I've still kind of struggled with that part.
Yeah, that one's a tough one because it is that it's the one part where you can kind of wonder what Arnold Friend is like. What, you know, either he, I don't know, did something to mess with her head and make her make her let go of it, or, you know, it is kind of that. Is it the point? Like you said, point of no return of almost her teenage years, you know, from being a child of her family to growing out on her own. Is this like the snap that, like, you know, and I don't know if all kids have this, but I know I definitely had a moment where my life switched from, hey, I'm a teen to like, oh, wait, I'm kind of out on my own. And it, you know, it was this like big event. And this almost like, was this it where she kind of had that one choice, the one call she could have made that maybe would have kept her safe with her family, but it like so got to her that she just couldn't go back. I don't know. It's
I kind of saw it that way too, but the first way I read the story was because I read the story without knowing any of the backstory the first time I approached it, and I always kind of saw it as this kind of destruction or loss of innocence in a time. And I feel like that moment in the story kind of plays along with that, where she has reached a point in this narrative that she can no longer go back from. And because she's reached this point, this is where the story gets kind of weird too, because we can reflect on it as like Arnold Friend was based on a real life serial killer. And then in the story, we kind of get maybe he's a real like human, maybe he's something else. And the story kind of keeps on teetering back and forth on that. And I think this one moment kind of leans on the maybe he's something else aspect of it.
Yeah.
But she just plays such a fine line teetering between the both that it's really hard to pinpoint it.
Because like you had that scene just a little bit before where he's kind of running through all of the hip lines that I guess the kid said. So and the way Connie's seeing it is like, well, he's trying everything. He's just, and it almost.
He's using like insults from like the 1940s to try to sound hip.
Yes. And so it's just this kind of like weird, like, again, like you could, if he's an older, I mean, he is older from what we can tell from him, and he's just doesn't know what kids are into, so he's just trying everything. Again, we had commented on fact the way he's dressed and just the way he acts is like he's trying to emulate these things. But you could also then look at it like, oh, he's like and obviously he's not a robot, but that kind of mindset of like he's just cycling through everything, because we get a lot of comments about the way he's talking and how he sounds, and not only the radio voice, but just like a lot of stage whispering and a lot of like vocalizing. There's even a point where he's looking past her, which I thought was interesting. Joyce Carol Oates talked about him talking to the house almost, looking, and even the same for Eli. He looks somewhere past her. He looks off to her side. So it's just this kind of weird, like I kind of like the more grounded one, but it are these weird kind of points where you're like, he's clearly off and there's something strange going on with him, which leads into the neighbor, how he talks about Miss Hutchin or something like that. And he says like, oh, she's fine. And Connie's like, no, she's been dead a year. And he just keeps saying like, oh, well, she's okay. And that one, I think when we talked about this last time, we almost, was it like, did Connie do something to the neighbor at one point? And this was like ascending. He was sent to take care of her because of whatever it was. We have no idea. There's no reference to that at all. It's just this interesting thing. Why would he know? Why would he pretend that she's not dead? But then Connie's like, no, she's dead. She's been dead a year.
Yeah, I interpret that as because he says, hey, you know that old woman down the road, the one with the chickens and stuff, you know her? And I interpreted that as he knew she was dead because he killed her. So maybe it was the 33-year-old. And so then that's why Connie's like, she's dead. He's like, dead? What? You know her? And so it's just like he's taunting her. That's the way I took it. Like, this is terrifying.
That makes it as a taunt as well.
That makes way more sense. I'm like,
her, like, oh, that's just so creepy. Like the language, the dialogue in this. So but that's the way I interpreted it. Like, is that the 33-year-old woman that down the road? Like, so maybe it's like, and then just thinking back to the phone. I hate to say this, but we have to remember she was 15.
Yeah.
She is surrounded, essentially. She's terrified. She's a little girl. And I just kind of thought about that idea of just being crippled with fear, just like overwhelmed with fear and not knowing what to do. So, I don't know, I just kind of thought of, I guess you have to think of it from that aspect too. And like, you want to think, she can be, she could pull it together and be brave, and there could be a triumph over evil here, but that's not the angle that Joyce Carol Oates took, because these are cases that happen, and she was writing it loosely based on someone that was killing women. So she kind of
and that's the one thing. It's like and I think this is for a lot of stories that are like this. It's almost, and I think you said this at the beginning, but my brain kind of forgot about it. But it's the fact that like you want it to be something supernatural because it's horrifying, to like think about this terrible thing happening. It's like you said it. Everyone listen back, rewind, and go back to that, because you said exactly what I was just thinking. Because it's like I want it to be supernatural. I want him to be the devil or an alien or some weird creature in a mask, because if you look at it otherwise, you're like, this poor girl who has her whole life ahead of her, and she's just living life, and this dude just like completely quashes it. There's no at that age, there's no escape. You would have, if somebody, I wouldn't want to pick up the phone because I'd be afraid that he's either going to come in because of these threats he's giving, or that he's going to kill my family. So yeah, it's exactly what you said.
Yeah, it's like I've said before, I consume a lot of horror. I am sorry to people that I know that write monsters and such, but what scares me are people. That's more terrifying to me than say, okay, right, you're gonna write about a demon. Okay, I don't. It doesn't, like, it's bad for me. Like I find those things like fascinating because it talks a lot about folklore, legend, or myth. But when I read something and it's grounded in truth, that scares the hell out of me. And so like a story like this, like we know, just going through and reading this story, we know that there have been, not just women, but there have been men and women that have been in this position, and they're so overwhelmed with fear because they know that they've reached a transition where they may not come out from. And that is, there was this point where I found, I think I wrote a note to myself. Connie felt a wave of dizziness rise in her at this sight, and she stared at him as if waiting for something to change the shock of the moment, make it all right again. And that was one of the scariest lines for me, because that was like, she knows she's not going to go back to the way things were before. And I think what we don't realize is that every single time somebody is murdered by someone, they are probably having that same emotion, like, this is it. Like, there is no, I just want it to go back. I just want it to go back 5 minutes before I ran into this scary person. I just want it to go back 10 minutes before, 3 seconds before, whatever it was. So that's what makes this much more scary to me than if it was like, I don't know, a monster or an alien or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's easy to sit and say like, oh, well, I can shoot the zombie in the head. I can do whatever, but it, especially as a viewer or as a reader, you could say all the things you're going to want to do. And heck, even in real life, lots of people reading articles or seeing news stories will say, well, I would have done it different, but you definitely wouldn't have. And that's the same for this. It's like, you nailed it with the phone, because it's like she's holding this phone, and as a reader, you're screaming like, just make the call.
Make the damn call.
Yeah, it's like,
just pick it up and call.
Just do it. And especially like now, we're like, man, just hit the emergency call, or just text somebody, and he won't know. But it's just that scary concept of like your brain just goes blank and you don't know, you're gonna do the wrong thing. No matter how much you've gone through or think you can go through or seen all the angles, and you're like, I've seen whatever, it's like, this is real life is a lot messier.
And we don't, many of us don't remember, once upon a time, all we had was like your home phone. And there have been tons of cases, older cases where people were killed, and they couldn't call for help because the phone lines were cut.
Yeah.
And, we now have our phones in our pocket. And I remember a time where I didn't have a cell phone and there was no cell phone. So it could have, would the story be different? She could have just hit the, panic button, sent a quick text without him seeing. But it was a different time that we were more isolated from your outside, from anyone on the outside, because all you had was just this phone in the kitchen on a wire.
Which I think also, that's a great point. And I think Joyce Carol Oates picked, it was an interesting choice to have where Connie lives, because she does live out in the middle of nowhere, because that's the same, the other idea. It's like, why couldn't she run in the backyard to a neighbor? But she has no neighbors, or the closest neighbor is somebody who's dead. Right. So it's just like, she is all alone. And like you said, she's isolated. She's a phone call and nobody around her. And
it's easy to say, like, even looking back at the story, it's easy to say, well, just run out for help. But she wrote it in a way that even, many decades later, we're all looking at it like, damn it, there was nowhere to go for help. Wow.
Nope.
Yeah.
Which it probably why Eli was in that whole story. He was the backup in case something did happen. I mean, he cut the phone line. He could probably chase her, even though he looked like a man baby.
He also had the weapon too.
Yes. So it's crazy. So yes, great story. I guess the only supernatural scary thing for me would be dolls, even if whatever it is, it is no business here with me. So, but anyway, yes, this awesome story. it is nice to find it online. It's there for everybody to find, and you should read it.
I would highly suggest, and this is just because I'm a really big Joyce Carol Oates fan, like if you like this story and you want to read more of her stuff, I'd recommend, she has a collection, I believe it's called High and Lonesome, and it's kind of like a best of that tackles her writing throughout several different decades. And I'd say that would be a good starting off point for her work.
That's a great recommendation. And she does these things like with this story, like it's been called like psychological realism. And I would say definitely read that collection.
Yeah, there's one of her. It's funny, like, and this is going a bit off of what we just discussed, but like one thing I really love about Joyce Carol Oates is like even if she releases a novel that I'm not really a fan of, I'll always find something about that novel I absolutely love.
And she's so prolific. Oh, and my God.
Right? Didn't she just have one come out?
She did, and she has like 2 more coming out this year.
Prolific. I have like 2 every year or something. It's insane.
Yeah.
It's just, but yeah, I agree. Even if there's something a story that you don't connect with, just her writing is wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, with this story, just some of the little things she captures. She like one line that stuck out to me was like her friend. It's funny. All of her friends aren't named until Arnold names them. They're all just girls she hangs out with or friend. And she talks about one of her friend's parents taking her, picking them up and then not asking, and how like not asking what they did and them not. I'm trying to remember what it was. It was just such an interesting little line of just like, we go out and we do stuff and we don't tell anyone what we do. It's just this like crazy little thing. And it's just such a neat like concept of like, yeah, you don't tell your parents, you don't tell adults what you're doing. You're out and you're having fun. And I loved it. And I love that she captures that kind of stuff.
She's really prolific and she's a fantastic writer. I don't know. I feel like even though she's so prolific, I still feel like she's underread. Because I talked to so many people and they're like, yeah, I never read her. And I'm like, you got to fix this now. Thank you so much for joining us with this discussion today, Sina.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. I guess
the
right word, but it's a lot of fun to talk about this awful story.
Right.
sad, scary story. But it's written. It's such a fantastic story. So read it.
It really is. And I know you recently just put out a new book. Can you tell our audience a little bit about that if you'd like?
Sure. So Children of Chicago is out now. It is my adult horror debut. I've written young adult horror novels in the past and poetry. And Children of Chicago is a genre mash of police procedural, crime, mystery, thriller, horror, and nonfiction. It takes place in Chicago where I live, and it's like an adaptation or an expansion of the Pied Piper fairy tale. And it follows Detective Lauren Medina as she tries to understand why teenagers are killing teenagers with increasing frequency in the city. And so it's just like I love Joyce Carol Oates and her allegories. It's my exploration into, or my argument that Chicago is the perfect setting for a dark fairy tale. And there's a lot of Grimm's fairy tales lore in it, and commentary perhaps for me in terms of like doing a side-by-side of our history as a city and how we've never come to terms with the violence here in our city. And that's why we continue to see awful, wicked things happening here. So please read it. Let me know what you think. I'm working on the next one that we're calling the Chicago Fairy Tale Saga, or the Chicago Saga. And Children of Chicago ends where it ends. I wrote it like a Greek tragedy where it doesn't end. It does not end happily ever after. There's not a lot of redeeming qualities of my characters, so I write bad people. And then the next one I'm writing right now, as well as a novella that I am staying up late trying to get these next 2 projects done. And then I think over the next few months, you'll see I have a chapbook coming out, Snow White's Shattered Coffin, which is like a more traditional, just grounded in horror story, and something else that I can't talk about, but it will be announced soon.
Awesome.
That title is amazing.
It is really good.
I think people like and I think Children of Chicago is a little, anytime you straddle or cross all these multiple genres, you're never going to make everybody happy. Like your traditional grounded in horror folks are going to be like, what the hell is this police procedural stuff? And your police, your mystery people are going to be like, what the hell is this supernatural stuff? So you're never going to make everyone happy. And I think it's something that I kind of learned. But I think Snow White's Shattered Coffin will make my horror community happy. It's just a good old fashioned like horror story that's based off of a local legend here in where I live.
Well, I'm looking forward to all of those.
Awesome.
Did because I know did the hardcover sell out?
It sold out.
That's awesome.
Before we even went to before it even before launch date. So it just it's now available. So I believe if you go to Amazon or your preferred bookseller, you should be able to get it now. So that was something I didn't know could happen so fast. So now I'm just like, I hope people who are waiting for it like it and are just not like, what the hell is all this nonfiction? But there's a lot of history that I kind of wove throughout it. So that was jarring for some folks too. And my favorite commentary has been like, it would have been a great book had it not been the police procedural or history included. Like that's the point of the book. It's right. A procedural with history. So if you like police procedurals and you like history, I think you'll like it. If you hate police procedurals and you hate history, then if you read Devil in the White City and you couldn't stand all the historical information, it probably won't work for you, and that's okay. It's totally okay. You get it.
Anything Chicago is happy with me. So
awesome.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to checking it out.
Cool.
And where can our listeners get in touch with you at?
You can find me on Twitter at Cynthia Pelayo. You can also find me at my website, cynthiapelayo.com. And then I'm on Instagram, and that's at Cynthia Pelayo Author.
Awesome. And Matt, what about you?
I am on Twitter at BrainenbergDM.
You can follow me on Twitter at Rudy53088, as well as be sure to follow our podcast on Twitter at Into Staring. Make sure to review our podcast, subscribe, and give it a like on all the various streaming services we're on. It helps us overcome this algorithm and makes the abyss spread everywhere until it consumes all. And this is Richard Gerlach saying keep staring.
Jason A. Meiske here, and I invite you to join me each Tuesday on the Sample Chapter Podcast, the show where authors from all over the world read a sample chapter from one of their books. There's been sci-fi, westerns, horror, romance, thrillers, and even the weird, so you're sure to find your next favorite book every Tuesday on the Sample Chapter Podcast.
This has been a presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.